A 15-year-old hunter was taken by a Sasquatch on an Appalachian mountain, and I found terrifying evidence up there that proves it. What started as a routine missing persons search turned into my worst nightmare that drove me off the mountain for good. And one discovery forced me and my team to learn which horrifying monster attacked this boy. My name is Idris Alcott. I ran search and rescue operations in western Appalachia for 19 years, and in that time I learned that mountains keep secrets the way small towns do, quietly, collectively, and for a very long time. This particular mountain has been keeping one since October 2016, and I was there when it started. Two things happened in the last 60 days that made staying quiet impossible. The first is that someone is writing a book about Levi Dalton's disappearance. I have seen the outline. It is wrong in ways that will hurt his father, and it names conclusions that the evidence does not support and leaves out the evidence that does. Thomas Dalton has been through enough, and he does not deserve to have his son's story told badly by someone who was never on that mountain. The second thing is that 3 weeks ago, a 17-year-old boy went missing on the same mountain, same month, same terrain. I knew before I picked up the phone what they were going to tell me, and I knew what it meant. I have photographs, audio recordings, physical evidence, and a trail camera card that shows exactly what followed Levi Dalton into those woods that day. Every official body I took it to refused to engage with it. But there is a 15-year-old boy who never came home, and now possibly a 17-year-old one, and I am done letting people call this an unsolved disappearance when I know it was something else entirely. I found terrifying evidence on that mountain that proves a Sasquatch took Levi Dalton, and I should have said that 7 years ago. The call came in at 5:17 p.m., a father reporting his 15-year-old son overdue from a solo hunt on the mountain. I had taken that kind of call before. A kid loses track of time, pushes too far in, gets turned around on the way back. 9 times out of 10, they walk out on their own before we even get the team together. I drove to the trailhead with 4 of my people and got there around 6. Thomas Dalton was standing at the tree line in the same clothes he had been wearing all day, still holding his phone, looking at the mountain like he could see something the rest of us could not. I have been to a lot of trailheads with a lot of families, and I can usually read within the first few minutes whether a case is going to be a long night or something worse. I looked at Thomas Dalton standing at that tree line, and I did not get the feeling it was going to be a long night. I got the feeling it was going to be something worse. Thomas Dalton asked me 2 questions while we stood at that trailhead waiting for the rest of the team to arrive. The first was how long we had before dark. The second was whether I thought his son was still on the mountain. I told him we had about 40 minutes of usable light and that yes, I believed Levi was still up there. That second answer was honest when I gave it. By the end of the week, I was not so sure. While we waited, Thomas told me one thing about Levi that I have never been able to put down. He said Levi had been drawing that hunting map for 2 years, adding to it every time they went up together, marking the spots where the deer moved, the places where the light came through the trees right at dawn. He said Levi treated that map like it was something worth keeping. Thomas found out later that Levi had taken it with him that morning without telling anyone. He wanted to add to it on his first solo hunt. That is the detail that has stayed with me longer than any piece of evidence I found on that mountain. We went up that night with flashlights and found his boot print in the mud about 1.5 miles in. Then a candy wrapper. Then his water bottle sitting upright against a rock at just past the 2-mile mark like he had set it down carefully and meant to come back for it. That bothered me more than if we'd found it smashed. After the water bottle, there was nothing. The trail gave us no additional prints, no dropped gear, and no indication that a 15-year-old boy had kept moving through that terrain at all. We pushed until 2 in the morning and came back down with nothing to show Thomas Dalton, except that his son had made it at least 2 miles in, and then the mountain had stopped talking. It did not make sense for a 15-year-old kid to simply stop leaving signs. There is a specific kind of quiet that a mountain has when something is wrong on it, and that mountain had it from the moment we stepped onto the trail. My team felt it too. Nobody said anything about it that night, but I could tell by the way they were moving that they felt it. Search teams get quiet when they're tired. This was different. I know it because by the second hour, nobody was talking like we were trying to find a missing kid anymore. The tracking team arrived on day 2 with 6 dogs. The handler had 22 years of search and rescue behind her and was the best in the region. I had worked with her before and I trusted her reads completely. The dogs picked up Levi's trail from the trailhead and pushed past where we had stopped the night before, past the water bottle, past the 2-mile mark, further up the mountain than my team had reached. I was maybe 30 yards behind the lead dog when they stopped. All 6 of them stopped at the same point at the same time. 3 of them refused to move forward at all, and the other 3 tried and turned back within a few steps. The handler looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing useful to say. In 19 years of search and rescue, I had never seen a full team shut down like that at a single location. There was nothing visible on that trail that should have caused that kind of response in 6 trained animals. She filed it as an extreme fear response, cause undetermined. I signed off on that because at the time, I did not have a better answer. What I did have was the feeling that the dogs knew exactly what was up that mountain and had made a decision that the humans around them were not equipped to make for themselves. That was the moment the search stopped feeling professional and started feeling personal. I had seen fear in search teams before, but never in the dogs. That changed something in me immediately. I left the dogs at the marker and went up alone. I pushed past the 1.8-mile marker alone and worked my way up toward the tree line above it. The terrain got steeper, the trees denser, the light already going flat by the time I reached the upper edge of the tree line. What I found there was not in any search report I filed that day. 4 trees immediately surrounding a small clearing had their bark stripped at a consistent height, roughly 8 feet off the ground. Something had done this deliberately, and whatever did it was tall enough to reach 8 feet without much effort. I stood next to one of the trees and looked up at the stripped section and then looked at the clearing and understood that whatever had done this had been standing there recently. The wood under the stripped bark was still pale and damp. Whatever did it had not been gone long. I photographed everything and went back down. I did not radio it in. I remember looking into that tree line and realizing none of us wanted to find out what was standing up there. On day 3, I started talking to people who lived near the base of that mountain, people who had grown up in the shadow of it and knew it the way you know something you have lived next to your whole life. Every conversation followed the same pattern. I would ask if they had noticed anything unusual on the mountain, and they would go quiet for a moment before answering. It was the quiet of someone deciding how much to say. An old man who had lived on the county road below the mountain. His entire life told me there was a name for what lived up there that his grandfather had used, and his grandfather's father before that. He said everyone in that county knew you did not go up that mountain alone in October. He said it like it has always been true and never needed explaining until someone from outside comes asking. I asked him why October specifically. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding whether I was worth the full answer. Then he said that October was when it got territorial, and that territorial was putting it mildly. He said his grandfather had a word for what it did to things that wandered into its range that month, and that the word did not translate well into anything I would want to hear. I went back to the search base, and the word territorial stayed with me the rest of that night. He was not the only one who said it. A woman who ran a small farm at the base of the mountain told me her husband went up there one October and came back the same day without his gear and never explained why and never went back. A retired logger who had worked the lower slopes in the 80s told me the crews used to joke about what lived up on the upper ridge until one October when 2 of them heard something moving through the tree line above camp that was large enough to shake the ground, and nobody joked about it after that. Every person I talked to knew. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but they all knew something was wrong with that mountain. On day 4, one of my team radioed in from the upper mountain. Prints in the dried creek mud 2 miles above the marker. I went up myself, 18 inches long, 5 toes, pressed so deep into the ground that whatever made them was carrying serious weight on each foot. My own boot next to one looked like a child's shoe. The stride length told me whatever made these prints had legs built for covering ground fast on steep terrain. 19 years in these mountains, and nothing had ever left a print like that in front of me. I stood there in that creek bed, staring at those prints, and realizing there was no normal explanation left anymore. Further up from the prints, maybe a quarter mile, we found a cluster of trees with their trunks snapped at about 15 feet off the ground. 4 of them in a rough line, all broken at the same height, the wood at the break still pale and fresh. One of my team members said it looked like storm damage and started to move on. I pulled out my radio and checked the weather records for the past 2 weeks. No storm, not even a significant wind event. I logged it as unexplained and watched my team's faces when I said that word out loud. Nobody argued with me. Nobody even tried. In another case, we would have argued about it for an hour. 19 years of working with these people, and they were not the type to let something go without a reasonable explanation. But standing in front of those trees, not one of them pushed back unexplained. They just looked at the brakes and looked at each other and kept moving. Then something moved in the tree line about 40 feet above us. Something large enough that the brush it displaced sounded like a man walking through a doorway. Every one of my team stopped at the same moment. I looked up at the tree line and thought about the prints in the creek bed, and the bark stripped at 8 feet, and the dogs that would not move past the marker. And I remember looking up into that tree line and realizing nobody on the team wanted to keep climbing. We came back down after that, and I reached the trailhead and knew two things. The search was ending, and deep down, I already knew Levi Dalton was never walking back down that mountain. A property owner on the north side of the mountain called the search base while we were still running active searches. He had a trail camera running on October 9th, mounted on a game trail along the upper north face, about 3 miles from where we found the water bottle. He handed me the SD card at his door and told me he did not want to watch it with me. He did not explain why, and I did not ask. I sat at his kitchen table with my laptop and went through 14 hours of footage. Deer moving through at dawn, a turkey around noon, nothing unusual through most of the afternoon. Then at 4:17 p.m., the motion sensor triggered and Levi Dalton walked into the frame, rifle over his shoulder, moving uphill at a steady pace, no sign anything was wrong. He looked like a kid on a good day in the woods. Then I saw what was moving in the tree line behind him. Something massive was moving parallel to him through the trees, tracking him at a consistent distance, staying just outside the clearest range of the frame. Levi never looked back once. That detail has never sat right with me. A kid alone in unfamiliar woods usually checks behind himself eventually. Levi never once did. Why? I went through the footage frame by frame. It was already there in earlier frames, further back, harder to see, moving in the same direction at the same pace. It had been behind him well before the camera caught it. This was not a chance encounter on a trail. I watched that footage 3 times that night. Levi never turned around once. At the time, I thought the trail camera footage was the worst thing I was going to find up there. I was wrong. That point, I already knew I was never going to look at that mountain the same way again. The following morning, I went back up the mountain alone before the rest of the team arrived. I wanted to push further than the official search had gone, and I wanted to do it without having to explain to anyone why. About a mile past the broken trees, I found something wedged inside a split in a tree trunk at about chest height, a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out carefully and opened it, and it was a hand-drawn hunting map. Pencil on notebook paper, trails marked, landmarks noted in a 15-year-old's handwriting. Levi's name written in the top corner, the way kids write their name on schoolwork. That map put Levi on the upper mountain at an elevation the official search never reached. He had made it much further up than the water bottle suggested, and whatever happened to him happened up there, in terrain that none of my teams had covered. I stood in the trees holding that map for a while and thought about a kid who had drawn it at his kitchen table the night before he went hunting and had no idea what was waiting for him up there. Neither did we. I logged it privately and told nobody. Reporting it meant sending my team further up that mountain, and I was not going to do that. I went back up alone 2 days before the official search ended. I had Levi's map and 6 weeks of evidence that all pointed to the upper mountain. I could not close this search without going up there one more time. I reached the area past the broken trees and pushed further north along the ridge. About a half-mile past that point, the wood knocks started. 3 of them, deep and resonant, coming from somewhere in the tree line to my left. I had heard wood knocks before in my research. Hearing them alone on the upper mountain where a 15-year-old boy had disappeared was a different experience entirely. Then the infrasound hit, that pressure in the chest with no obvious source, the feeling that something is wrong before your eyes have confirmed anything. My legs wanted to go back down the trail, and I made myself stay. Then it screamed. One sustained vocalization from somewhere close in the tree line that went on long enough that I had time to understand exactly how close it was and exactly how alone I was up there. I have been in dangerous situations in these mountains before. That was the only time I have ever felt like I was being told in a language older than words that I was not going to walk back down if I stayed where I was. I walked back down and did not stop moving until I reached the trailhead. I did not go back up there alone again for 7 years. I had been on dangerous searches before. I had never once felt like the mountain itself was making a decision about me. The official search closed 2 days later. The decision came from above me, and I did not fight it the way I should have. 6 weeks and 200 volunteers and every resource the county could put together, and all we had to show for it was a water bottle and a candy wrapper. On paper, the case had nothing left to justify the cost of continuing. I signed the closing report because I did not know how to explain in writing why I believed we needed to keep going without also explaining what I believed we were looking for. And I was not ready to put that in a document with my name on it. 3 of my team members never came back to search and rescue after that mountain. I had never seen a case stay with people the way this one did. One of them had been with me for 11 years. He did not explain why he was leaving, and I did not ask because I already knew. The others transferred to different counties within the month. I ran into one of them at a hardware store about a year later, and he looked at me for a moment and then looked away and kept walking. That was the last time I saw him. The morning I drove to Thomas Dalton's house, I sat in my truck at the end of his road for a while before I pulled into the driveway. I had told families hard things before. I had never walked into a house knowing what I knew and planning to say what I was about to say. I told myself I was protecting him. I have not entirely believed that in 7 years. I drove to his house the morning after I filed the report. I sat across from Thomas Dalton at his kitchen table and told him we had done everything we could and that the case would remain open and that if anything new came to light, the sheriff's department would follow up. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he asked me one question. He asked me if I knew what had happened to his son. I have thought about my answer to that question every day for 7 years. I told him I did not know. That was the only lie I have ever told a family in 19 years of search and rescue, and I told it because I did not know how to tell a man sitting in his kitchen that his 15-year-old son had been taken by something that every official body I worked with would not acknowledge existed. He nodded and thanked me for coming and walked me to the door. Before I got to my truck, he called after me. He said he knew I was not telling him everything. He said he could live with that as long as I promised him I was not done looking. I told him he had my word. After the official search closed, I started pulling records on every disappearance reported in and around that mountain, going back as far as the county archives went. What I found was a list that nobody in any official capacity had ever connected into a pattern because nobody had ever looked at them all together. I went in expecting maybe 1 or 2 cases with similar characteristics, something I could point to and say there is a pattern worth investigating. What I found instead was 7 of them, going back to 1976, and I sat in that archive for a long time after I found the last one, just looking at the dates lined up on the table in front of me. 7 disappearances over 40 years, all on or within 2 miles of that mountain, all unsolved, all involving people who had gone into those woods alone. And when I laid them out in chronological order, the thing that stopped me cold was not the number of them. It was when they happened. Every single one of them was in October. I spent a long time trying to find an explanation for the October pattern that did not point where everything else was already pointing. Then I found the indigenous oral traditions. I started digging into older stories tied to the mountain, and one thing kept coming up over and over again. October, people around that area had been quietly avoiding those woods that time of year for generations. A 15-year-old boy from a hunting family in western Appalachia walked into that territory alone on October 9, 2016. He had no idea what October meant on that mountain. Nobody had told him because nobody talked about it to outsiders. And the thing that had been using those woods since before anyone in that county was born was waiting. 7 years after the official search closed, I went back up that mountain at night for the first time. I had a thermal camera, an audio recorder, and 7 years of evidence that I needed one more piece to complete. I reached the upper ridge around 9 and set up the thermal camera facing the tree line to the north. The first 2 hours were quiet. Then, at just past 11, the audio recorder picked up wood knocks. 3 of them from somewhere close in the tree line, the same rhythm I had heard 7 years earlier in the same place. I did not move. I want to be honest about what sitting on that ridge at 11 at night actually felt like. 7 years of evidence had not made me comfortable up there. Knowing what I knew made it worse, not better. I was sitting in the dark on the upper ridge of a mountain where a 15-year-old boy had been taken and something that had been there for generations was standing 60 feet away from me in the tree line, and I was the only person who knew where I was. The infrasound came next. Stronger than anything I had felt on that mountain before, strong enough that my hands were shaking before I understood why. And then the thermal camera picked up a heat signature at the edge of the tree line, large, upright, standing completely still about 60 feet away, looking directly at where I was sitting. We stayed like that for a long time. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, and the wood knocks started again from further away, and then stopped. I pulled the thermal footage when I got back down. The heat signature was over 8 feet tall. I remember staring at the screen and realizing I finally had proof something had been standing up there with us all along. I have looked at a lot of thermal footage over the years, and the outline was clear enough to make out the shoulders, the width of the torso, and arms that hung far too low to look human. It stood completely still for over 4 minutes before turning and walking back into the trees. I showed the footage to 3 people afterward, and every one of them went quiet when they saw it. I have that footage. It is the clearest evidence I have ever captured on that mountain, and it has been sitting in a box with everything else for 2 years, waiting for someone to do something with it. 7 years is a long time to be right about something nobody will acknowledge. I retired 2 years ago, not entirely by choice. When you spend the better part of a decade telling anyone who will listen that a Sasquatch took a 15-year-old boy on a mountain in your county, and you have the evidence to back it up, your professional reputation takes a hit that does not fully recover. 2 colleagues I had worked with for over a decade stopped returning my calls. The sheriff who logged Levi's rifle as accidental damage told me at a gas station 3 years after the search that I needed to let it go and that people were starting to talk. I told him people had been dying on that mountain since at least 1976 and that talking was the least of our problems. My ex-wife would tell you this case was a significant factor in our divorce, and she would not be wrong. I kept going back anyway. Every October, I went up that mountain with whatever equipment I could justify buying, and I documented everything I found, and I added it to the box, and I kept looking for the door that would open. After a while, you stop expecting the door to open, and you start doing it, because stopping feels like telling Thomas Dalton that his son did not matter enough to keep going. I was not able to do that. I took the evidence through every official channel I could think of. Every single one of them looked at what I had and chose not to engage with what it meant, not because the evidence was insufficient, because it was inconvenient. I used to think the silence was about skepticism. I do not think that anymore. Every person I took the evidence to understood what they were looking at. The silence was a choice, and the choice was about what acknowledging it would require them to do next. After enough years, you stop mistaking silence for disbelief. The only door that never closed was Thomas Dalton's. He still lives in that house with the same view of the same tree line, and every time I have driven out there over the last 7 years, he has opened the door before I could knock. He knew I was not done. He was not done either. 6 weeks after the official search ended, I got an envelope in the mail at my office. No return address, no note inside, just a single photograph printed on plain paper. It was a trail photograph taken on the upper mountain. I recognized the terrain from my solo walks up there. In the foreground, half buried under leaves and debris, was Levi's rifle. I could see the stock clearly enough to make out the make and model. I had memorized every piece of gear Levi had been carrying when he went up that mountain, because that is what you do on a missing persons case. I never found out who sent it, but whoever took that photograph had been standing close enough to the rifle to see the barrel. They had seen what was done to it, and they had still not gone to the sheriff. That told me something about what people in that county were and were not willing to put their names on. I drove up to the location in the photograph the following morning and found the rifle exactly where the picture showed it. It was about 2 miles above where Levi's map put him, deeper into the upper mountain than I had gone on any of my solo walks. I found it half buried under leaves, exactly where the photograph showed it, stock first, like it had been dropped straight down from above. I picked it up and understood immediately that something was wrong with it. The weight was off. For a second, I thought the barrel had snapped, but it hadn't. It had been folded. I turned it over, and that is when I saw what had been done to it. I stood up there on that mountain alone, holding that rifle for a long time. A 15-year-old boy had carried that gun up here for protection. Whatever took him had not been bothered by it in the slightest. The barrel was bent clean in half, not broken, not damaged from a fall. Bent deliberately, folded over like a piece of aluminum foil. Whatever force did that to a steel rifle barrel did it with its hands, and did it without much effort, because there was no other way to produce a bend that clean. I photographed it and brought it straight to local authorities. I laid the rifle on his desk and watched his face while he looked at it. He picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. Then he told me it had probably been damaged in a fall and that the terrain up there was rough enough to do that kind of thing to equipment. I asked him to show me a fall that bends a steel barrel in half at a clean 90-degree angle without scratching the stock. He did not have an answer for that. He logged it as accidental damage and put it in a box. And that was the last time any official in that county engaged seriously with anything I brought them about Levi Dalton. But I was on that mountain. I found those prints and those broken trees and that rifle with my own hands. I have the trail camera footage and the thermal image and 40 years of October disappearances that nobody has ever officially connected. The evidence does not leave room for another explanation. Levi Dalton was 15 years old when he went up that mountain alone on October 9th, 2016, and a Sasquatch took him. The terrifying evidence found on that mountain proves it.